Imagine that the person that you're secretly in love with gives you a birthday present. Here it is, they say, but I want you to wait 3 days until your birthday until you open it. So you don't sleep that night or the next night, and you're wondering whether that's a profession of love inside or is it something more mundane. You notice that it's not sealed, and you could open it and you could close it again. Nobody would know. So could you just raise your hand if you take a sneak peek, look what's in the box, and then close it again? Just raise your hand. Great. We'll come back to the box towards the end of the talk. But I want to take you back to when I was at primary school, and I had reached the final of the school Christmas quiz. And I was there with one other girl called Caroline, and I was 6 years old. And we were standing at the front of the whole school assembly, and the teacher asked a question. The question was, which animal does beef come from? And if I answered this question correctly, I would win the quiz. So I stood on the stage and I froze. I didn't know the answer. And I waited. I didn't have enough savvy to say, could you repeat the question, please? So time ran out, and the teacher turned to Caroline, said, which animal does beef come from? And she replied with confidence, the cow. And everybody cheered and I put my head down in shame. And I walked off of the stage. And from that moment, I became addicted to knowledge. And for me, knowledge was a way to avoid the vulnerability and the shame I felt as a young child when I got something wrong or I didn't know the answer. And we live in a society that knowledge is really prized, it's valued. Bacon said knowledge is power. And truly, it's very important. I'm not undermining the importance of knowledge. Advances in technology help us live longer, and they've made us progress in nearly every field of human endeavor. But what I want to present in this short talk is the other side as well, that knowledge can be dangerous. And it can be dangerous when we give away our power to experts. Friedrich Hayek, when he accepted the Nobel Prize for Economics, he entitled his winner's speech, "The Pretense of Knowledge," and he warned against making policy based on the omniscience of economic theory. Norina Hertz, she's written a book called Eyes Wide Open, How to Make Smart Decisions in a Confusing World. She says we need to democratize knowledge, and we need to take experts off their pedestal. And brain scans reveal that when people are listening to experts speak, the independent part of their brain that's responsible for decision-making literally shuts down. Nicholas Taleb, who wrote the book, The Black Swan, he was more forthright. He said, it's not a good idea to take a forecast from anybody wearing a tie. So often our experts are wrong. The Institute of Medicine estimates that between $17 and $29 billion annually is wasted on inaccurate and unnecessary patient care due to misdiagnosis, and perhaps 1 in 20 hospital deaths. So the consequences are dramatic. One of the issues is the problem of overconfidence. Not confidence, but being overly confident. An example of this is the global financial crisis. In 2008, in November, the Queen went to visit the London School of Economics, and she was in front of students and academics and regulators, and she asked them the question, if all of you people are so smart, how come nobody predicted the credit crunch would come? So the British Academy decided to answer her question, and in June, on the 17th of June in 2009, it convened a panel of experts, government regulators, academics, to answer her pertinent question. And on the 26th of July, they released a letter from embargo that said, actually, the crisis was not unforeseen. There were many warnings that the crisis would come. The problem wasn't a lack of knowledge. In fact, one global bank that's now largely in government hands had 4,000 risk managers globally. The problem was overconfidence in the expertise of a few and the blind trust that they understood what they were doing. Alan Greenspan, he later wrote that he couldn't find a greater example of hubris mixed with overconfidence. Literally, we need to take into account that we're much more limited, even cognitively, than we think we are. Take, for example, people that we think are very strong cognitive capabilities, chess grandmasters. As of 2013, there were 1,441 in the world. And chess grandmasters can only think 15 moves ahead, roughly. So imagine in a game with fixed and consistent rules, that's all they can think, compared to markets and the world we live in which there's millions of actors making moves that are predictable and unpredictable, rational and irrational. It's impossible that anybody could know. Daniel Kahneman, who's recently written a book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, says there's over 150 unconscious biases, from primacy bias, you remember what you hear first, recency bias, or last, confirmation bias, when you just remember what supports what you already think. He goes so far as to say, if you think you have reasons for your beliefs, you're probably mistaken. But yet, given all that we don't know, the three most powerful words that we're afraid to say, whether it's in business, whether it's in politics, or whether you're in any leadership or position, is I don't know. I was with the CEO of a company, and he said to me, Stephen, I'm meeting my senior team the next day, and I'm really not sure what we're going to plan for the next 5 years, but I cannot say to them I don't know, because if I tell them this, I'm immediately deauthorized. I'll lose all my credibility. So what I want to do is to present in this short talk the idea to reframe I don't know as something negative. We use the metaphor of being in the dark to something positive, because saying I don't know helps us avoid overconfidence, arrogance, and hubris, and it allows us to take responsibility. The night and day are both half-half, yet we privilege the light. And if we think about it, all growth, all change happens in the unseen. It happens in the darkness, whether it's the seed in the earth or the baby in the womb. So just when you think nothing is happening, that might be the greatest possibility of change within our lives. Bion said, darkness illuminates. Not knowing isn't the same as not knowing information. If I want information, I might go to a search engine. So it's very different than that. It's not when problems are simple either. This is an image from a train toilet door. Don't ask me why I took a picture of the train toilet door, but this is an example of something that's very simple. Here, the example of something a bit more complicated. Is the door locked or not? It's a bit more complicated. But the challenges that we're facing today in our lives aren't only simple, and they're not just complicated, they're chaotic and they're complex. And it's not easy to apply the same type of answer that we would to that kind of problem. So let's look at an example of that. This is a crossroads in Addis Ababa, and notice the pedestrians crossing the street. So they're navigating and they're making decisions in the moment according to what's happening around them. So often, when we're at the edge of what we know, we come to a place that we term, I use the metaphor of Finisterre. Finisterre was, if you've ever done the Camino de Santiago, it's on the edge of Spain. And it's literally, it means in Latin, the end of the earth. And in the medieval times, they thought that this was literally the end of the earth, because people who sailed might not have come back. So on the old maps, they would draw dragons or they would draw lions in the waters, because it was that terrifying. So when we come to the edge of what we know and enter the great unknown, we're facing this edge in our own lives. And we can feel it because it feels vulnerable. It feels different. And we can sense it in our bodies that we're reaching this place of the edge. And these are some of the typical reactions that come up when people reach the edge. So at the top corner, you can see some of the reactions is a rush to control, asserting more control over what you have. There might be passivity and self-defeat. It's not worth doing anything. We're not going to succeed here. Maybe there's paralysis by analysis. You do an Excel, you make a task list, you get consultants. But by the time you've analyzed, the problem has changed. Another issue is catastrophic thinking. You know, it'll all go wrong. I can't leave my job. I can't start a business. I can't do this, because you're thinking of the worst case scenario. Another reaction is the rush to action. Let me do something, anything, quick. rather than sitting a bit longer in the unknown. And the last one is resistance. You might feel that through procrastination, or it might be feelings or thoughts. I'm not good enough. I can't do this. So some form of resistance. What I want to propose is that when you're at the edge, it's not the same as entering the unknown. It's not the same as uncertainty. Uncertainty is only one feeling in response to the unknown. If you think of children at Christmas or birthdays, they don't feel uncertain about what presents they're going to get. They are excited, curious. So the proposition here is we don't need to mind the gap. Actually, the gap is a place of opportunity. Not knowing is the space between the known and the unknown. And there are people that thrive in that space, whether they're entrepreneurs, artists, adventurers, explorers. So together with my co-author, Diana, we interviewed these people to find out what did they do to face the great unknown, not as a place of uncertainty, but as a real place for opportunity in their lives. And what we discovered is it's not about learning new things. It's not about adding another tool to your kit box. Actually, it's about unlearning. And we used the phrase from the poet John Keats. He talks about negative capabilities, meaning making space. He wrote a letter to his brothers George and Thomas on the 21st of December, 1817. And he describes negative capability as the ability to be in uncertainty, mystery, and doubt, without irritable reaching after fact and reason. So I'd like to share with you 4 quick negative capabilities that you can practice to make space for looking at the unknown as a place of opportunity. The first is empty your cup. I trained as a psychotherapist, and one of my clients had severe depression for 7 years. And I was with him, and I thought I needed to know everything about depression in order to help treat him. And my supervisor, he turned to me and said, "Stephen, what makes you think you need to be an expert in order to help this particular individual? What are your other ways of doing that?" And he said a phrase to me, it's from Suzuki Zen Roshi. It's this: "In the beginner's mind are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." And that gave me more confidence to try something different. Reportedly, the founder of Aikido, he died in his 80s. His name was Morihei Ueshiba, and he asked to be buried in a white belt. And that's significant because even though he was a master, even though he knew what his art was, he still thought of himself as a beginner. What can I learn here? How can I see things afresh and with new eyes? And examples of this from the real world are things like microfinance or telephone banking. They all grew in contexts and cultures where there were no existing path dependencies, so they could flourish because people didn't know or weren't wedded to a traditional way of doing those particular activities. I love this quote. It's from the founder of the Grameen Bank. It says very clearly that not knowing can be a blessing sometimes. When you're open, you can do things in your way without worrying about the rules and procedures. Every time he needed a rule or a procedure, he'd look at what others do and what conventional banks do. And when he learned what they did, he did the opposite. So conventional banks go to the rich, he went to the poor. They went to men, he went to women. They were owned by rich people. His bank, Grameen Bank, was owned by poor people. And he said he could try because he didn't know anything. So there's a beauty in freshness and naivety when facing the great unknown in that respect. The second principle is from the artist Paul Gauguin. He says, "Close your eyes in order to see." I went to something called Dialogue in the Dark. I don't know if you've been. I went in Innsbruck, and I entered a building in total darkness, and I was guided by somebody through this darkness. It was as if we crossed a street, a busy road, a river, and then at the end, we had a meal in a restaurant in complete darkness. But I was guided by this person really expertly. And when I left the building, it was only then that I realized that he was blind. And he'd been the one who actually had the eyes, that actually had the vision to guide me so clearly in what I was totally incapable of seeing. This is a famous picture. It's called Empathy. And the picture is remarkable because the artist, Marco Antonio Martinez, the photographer, is blind. He didn't take the picture through the normal way. He used his hand as aperture. He sensed his environment. Often we're too over-reliant on certain sources of data, individuals, sources of information, when we're facing the unknown. So the idea is here, the eyes are the fascias of the head. How can we make our other senses come alive? And more importantly, our hearing and our listening for each other. Study done at University of Rochester said doctors tend to interrupt after 23 seconds and make a diagnosis. And if they only waited 6 more seconds, the patient would reveal something significant that might have changed the diagnosis. So how can we all listen a little bit longer beyond what we normally would before interrupting? The third principle is leap into the dark. This is one of my favorite photos. It's by the artist Yves Klein. And you can see that the person in the photo is smiling. And this was the days before Photoshop, but he's leaping to what looks like death on a concrete Parisian street. And why is he smiling? He's smiling because Yves Klein, he knew, he was a martial artist, he knew how to fall safely. So the third principle, sometimes when we're facing the great unknown, we need to step forward, and we need to find our way forward through some form of action. There's a beautiful poem by Apollinaire. "Come to the edge," he said. "They said, we are afraid." "Come to the edge," he said. They came. He pushed them, and they flew. My own fear around trying something new and taking a step is I'm scared of heights. I have been since a child. So I decided to try out for myself what would the challenge be, and I tried the flying trapeze. I don't know if you've ever done it, but in Regent's Park, I went one Saturday with a friend, and I was the only one above 12 years old. The others were all kids, and they were really playing with each other, and I was really shy and nervous. And we practiced on the lower trapeze. It was a few feet off the ground, how to do the moves. And the point came to climb this ladder up a 40-foot pole, and at the top to stand on a plank. And then I'd reach forward, and there was a point that as I leaned into the forward, I couldn't hold on. I needed to let go or I'd tear myself apart, and I went with the flow. And I flew through the air, and at the very top of the trapeze, I hooked my legs over, and I fell backwards through the air. And what I discovered is this. It's when we feel the most groundless, that nothing is supporting us, and when we feel we're the most at the height of our uncertainty, that's the exact place when the most flexibility and movement is possible. So the dancer doesn't move a lot on the ground, but makes the moves in the air, like the ballerina or the gymnast. So when you feel in your life everything is changing, maybe that's the moment that you've got the most freedom to try something different, to try something new in your face. A case study is the company Intuit that made the tax software Quicken. They wanted to raise the income of farmers in rural India by just 10%. But rather than having one answer to this problem, they devised 13 different experiments or hypotheses, from giving them mobile phones, texting the market prices, testing whether the market would honor the farmers' prices. And they managed through these experiments, not one way, to raise income of farmers by 20%, which makes the difference between sending a child to school or not. So it's what way can we experiment? How could we try something new? So adventure begins when all other solutions might fail. And the last principle is delight in the unknown. It can be a beautiful place that we can have newness and freshness. So coming back to the secret present by the person you're secretly in love with, I could open it now, and I could discover something like socks. Or I could wait a bit longer and just see what is it that's in this box. And I have a clue from the myths. There's a myth of Psyche and Eros. They were lovers, and they were separated. And Psyche could be reunited with Eros if she passed the trials that were given to her by the goddess Aphrodite. So she went through these several trials, and the last trial was to get the perfume box from the goddess Persephone, the queen of the underworld. The only catch is nobody went into the underworld and returned. It's quite a big catch. So she managed to pay the ferryman. She crossed the river Styx into the underworld. She got past the dogs, and she got into the underworld, and she met Persephone. And she said, "Persephone, please can I have your perfume box?" And Persephone gave her the box under one condition. Do you know what that condition was? The condition was, don't open the box. So she had the box, and she came back. She passed the first trials, the ravenous dogs. She was about to ascend and be reunited with her lover. And what did she do? She opened the box, and the myth says she fell unconscious, which is a euphemism for she died. Now, what was in the box? So what people think was in the box was knowledge of mortality. And that's what kept Persephone so young. So the value of this story, or the point of this story, is the gods envied our ability not to know. They were omniscient, they knew everything. But the fact that we don't know means that every day can be fresh, every day can be new, every moment full of possibility. And that's something that they could never have. So as you face the unknown or the great unknown in your life, I'll leave you with my favorite quote. It's by a Spanish poet, Antonio Machado. He says, "Traveler, there is no path. The path is made by walking." So I'm wishing you a great path forward, and thank you very much.